what's the location of your emergency?
I have no idea where I'm at. I am in the middle of nowhere. We were looking for Shantae Blankenship.
Okay.
We found her.
You okay? Does she need any medical attention?
Is she alive? She's dead.
Brown County Sheriff's Department found the body of Rhonda Shantae Blankenship on County Road 424. They're calling her death a homicide.
Blankenship died from a crushed larynx and blunt force injuries to her neck, face, and torso. Sheriff Vance Hill says some of those injuries were caused by a lawnmower blade found near her body.
Bryan County law enforcement arrested 21-year-old Ryan Riggs for capital murder. The break in the case came when the sheriff's office released a computerized sketch of Riggs using his DNA. Blankenship and Riggs went to the same church.
Pastor Keener says Riggs then went before the entire congregation and confessed to killing fellow church member Shantae Blankenship before turning himself in.
He said, I need to confess something. And in that confession, he said, I've done something real bad. I murdered her.
You good? You okay? Bottle of water? I'm gonna have one. I just have one. Okay. Sheriff just gave me a call a little while ago and said that you got something off your chest, and we're just gonna see if you tell us what you got off your chest.
I'm the one who murdered Shantae Blankenship.
When did this happen?
On Friday the 13th.
Okay. So this happened on Friday the 13th. Tell me about that day. How did you start that day out?
It was just like an average day to me up until I did what I did.
He says that he's killed Shantae, but there's no real emotion. There's nothing in his body language that suggests that he's experiencing any real stress. He's not shaking. He's not showing any outward or visible signs of stress. He's somewhat matter of fact about the whole thing. And those are some of the indications that start to suggest that there is a psychopathic presence.
Where did you find Shantae that day?
She was walking past the mailboxes in Tamarack. I stopped and asked her if she needed a ride. And she got in my truck, and I asked her if she was going home. She said no. I asked her if she wanted to hang out. She said yes. Whenever I saw her, it's like I've always had this different part of me that it just wants nothing but destruction and evil. And whenever I saw her that day, it took over. I knew what I was trying to get, or what it was trying to get. It wanted to kill somebody. It wanted to rape.
What is it? Your destructive side, is that what you're talking about?
The only thing I can think of what it might be is Satan.
Satan.
He's owning that he has strong impulses to do things that he's told he shouldn't do. He invokes Satan. It feels evil to him. It comes to him very naturally. And so that's what's interesting about him. He's aware of these feelings that he has, these urges that he has to do things that he knows aren't right, but it bothers him that it doesn't bother him.
Riggs slips up in this part of the interview and tells authorities some details about what had taken over in him. But when he switches tracks and refers to himself and his actions as it and identifies it as Satan, what I hear is somebody who actually thought through and contemplated what his story was going to be when he finally did confess to authorities, and he forgot. He had a moment where he forgot that he had planned to distance himself from his own actions, that it was something inside of him, like a monster, that did this, not himself. And that subtle switch where he says, I, and then switches to it, is somewhat significant and more consistent with psychopathic behavior and not a misunderstood teenager.
When y'all were sitting in the truck talking, what are y'all talking about?
Music.
What y'all liked, or what was playing, or what?
Well, I had a sound system in my truck, so I was letting her go through all my music and stuff. And I was talking to her about the music that she liked and Every time she'd play a song, she'd say something like, "Oh, that's my song."
The way that Riggs hangs out with Shantae and describes that they're sitting in the car, they're flirting, they're listening to music.
There is an element of manipulation in this, that he is basically trying to pull her in and get her to feel comfortable. It is an effort to disarm her so that ultimately he'll have greater control and power over her.
I'm not sure what exactly I wanted. I just don't know how to describe it. I wanted both things to happen, the rape and the murder.
Did Friday the 13th play a role in this?
No, it's just, as soon as I seen her, it's just something that wasn't me came over me. We went down in there, and it's surrounded by trees, and we parked, and we were sitting in the truck for a while. And then, out of nowhere, I just put my left arm around her and began to strangle her. And whenever she had passed out, I took her clothes off and I raped her. And then afterwards, I went to that abandoned house on County Road 424. And I dragged her body out of my truck. Then I threw her over that fence, and then climbed over the fence and dragged her to that tank battery where I put her. I went back to my truck and got a lawnmower blade out of the back of my truck. And I went back to where she was, and I beat her to death with it to make sure that she was dead.
Do you think she was dead before that?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Why do you not think so?
Because parts of her body were still moving and twitching.
Were her eyes open or closed?
Her eyes were open, but they were open the entire time.
What he chose to do was harm her, torture her, drag her off, and then bludgeon her. And all of those indications suggest somebody who's got paraphilic interests. Paraphilias are deviant sexual interests. What we're talking about is an individual who gets sexually aroused by creating harm and fear in their victims. The non-consensual component of that sexual activity is the point of arousal.
Now, did you use anything else hitting her besides the lawnmower blade?
I remember putting a knife to her throat, even though it wasn't sharp at all.
This is an example of his sadistic tendencies and desires. He is going above and beyond. At this point, she's presumably already dead, which is a very personal action to take and full of rage. So it's an enhanced level of sadism that he is getting some sort of pleasure out of being so violent with her.
The clothes you were wearing that night, what were you wearing?
I don't even remember. I know I was wearing shorts, that's for sure.
What did you do with those clothes?
Probably just kept them. I didn't try to dispose of them or anything.
What kind of shoes were you wearing?
I was wearing some Jordans that I used to have.
Where are those shoes now?
In the garbage. I threw them away a long time ago.
So you kept them for a little while?
I kept them for a while.
How come you kept them?
I just thought that they were good shoes.
Riggs may have been keeping the shoes because functionally they were nice shoes, but more likely he kept them as a trophy. He kept them as a reminder of the crime and what he had done. And the dubious part about it is that they were hidden in plain sight. They were part of the weapons used in this crime that harmed her. And ultimately, nobody at that point suspected that he had anything to do with Shantae's disappearance, much less her rape and her murder. And to walk around with those shoes on for some time after she was killed and found really does start to speak to someone who was reliving it.
How did you know Shantae?
Well, she was widely known in that community, so everyone knows everyone out there. She went to church, the same church I went to. My parents would pick her up or give her rides sometimes. Sometimes I feel like that she liked me and she was always trying to flirt. I didn't want anything to do with that.
When you say she would flirt with you, what would she do?
She would just joke and just talk and laugh.
Right.
But I would just block her out until she wasn't there.
His victim selection is really important to his MO. He's keeping it close to home. He very easily could have gone somewhere else to find a victim in a different community and then just come back. Part of targeting her is because her absence will be noted that's doing something for him. It calls to mind like the arsonist who goes to watch the fire in a way.
Reeks is someone that it's hard to know what his motivation was towards the negative feelings he had towards Shantae. But what does seem to emerge is this sense of jealousy. The community was protective of her. They made room for her. Reeks may have had some jealousy that he himself didn't feel protected or loved or wanted, that the community hadn't made such room for him and embraced him. And as a result, that may have been some hostility that played out during the crime as well.
Let's say this, like, how many times had you met her before or hung out?
Well, actually hanging out probably just a handful of times, like 4 or 5 times, whenever she just happened to be with the same people that I was with. Usually, we would just hang out like at the pool.
Through all that time, you knew she was a little bit mentally handicapped.
Yes.
Do you think that played a role in this for you?
I think whatever came over me knew that she was an easy target.
You think that's because she was a small girl or because she had the mental problems or both?
Individuals who are psychopaths purposely target the weaker and the more vulnerable because they can be easy targets. He viewed her as an easy target because of her size and her cognitive limitations. And it's an opportunity for him to take control, exact his will and desires, and not have to fight too hard for it.
Is this something you're thinking about doing, or is it just something when you woke up that morning that those thoughts came over you? Or?
Well, before I had seen Shantae walking, I had decided to go for a drive in my truck because sometimes I just like to drive around the community and blare loud music. And whenever I was driving and I had seen her, just immediately it was like something else had come over me.
So she just happened to be in the wrong spot? You think it's just you saw her and knew her and thought, this is somebody that'll work for this? Do you know?
It's like I didn't have any thought process at all. My eyes were watching me do what I was doing, but there was no thought behind it. Just one evil.
You said that you had seen her walking around before, right? Of course, she walks around there all the time. Before this day, had you ever seen her walking and go, one of these days? Or was it just a spur of the moment deal that night?
It was just on that moment. I had never had any type of thoughts like that about her.
Had you ever had those type of thoughts about anybody before?
Not anyone specific, but wanting to do that to a person, yes.
How long have you been having those thoughts before this happened?
I've always had these thoughts. It's always been like I've been living with a different part of me. Sometimes it's mean, sometimes it's something else that just wants evil and nastiness.
He's saying it's evil in me, but it's him. When he says nothing's going through his mind, I don't think that's actually how it's happening. I don't think he's lying, but I think he has a hard time kind of tapping into the part of his brain that feels just very natural doing these things that seem so unnatural to most people.
What made you decide to talk to her?
These past couple of days, been trying to figure out what it is that I need to do.
Now, about a week ago, when we started knocking on your door and stuff, we released a composite profile picture to the media. Did you see that?
Yeah.
What did you think when you saw that?
I remember thinking, I hope that no one sees this and tells them that they know someone who looks like that.
So Riggs' decision to confess was not because he was overcome by guilt. It's not because he was overcome by regret or remorse for what he had done to another human being. It's because he knew that he was going to be found. It may have been his attempt to remain in control of the narrative, which is, I'm a good person who did a bad thing, and I have all this remorse and regret.
I can't imagine what you've been going through for the past year and a half. The anxiety, you know, has it gotten to you pretty hard? Had you tried to kill yourself before?
Yes.
Yeah. Before this last week?
Yes. I've tried to kill myself on numerous occasions, before and after what I did to Shanti. So I've always known that there was another part of me that was no good.
Hard to say about his expression of suicidality, if he genuinely had been suicidal or if he's saying it in order to garner sympathy and perhaps impact the outcome of his case, or maybe it's a little bit of both. But his other actions and statements throughout this interview and in the records do not paint the picture of someone who is riddled with grief and remorse over his actions.
You said you hadn't done this to other people. Have you done it to other things like animals, livestock, anything like that?
We used to have a Chihuahua, and sometimes I would get the same feelings that I did whenever I saw Shantae. I tried on numerous occasions to drown that Chihuahua in a 5-gallon bucket of water. I would try to hold it there until it would stop kicking and struggling.
This is an early red flag for future violent behavior, or even sadistic behavior. Individuals who hurt those that are more vulnerable to them, whether we're talking about an animal or a human being, are people who tend to be particularly callous and not have the same respect for humanity that the majority of society does. So this small animal was another easy victim for him.
But I would just hold it there long enough to where I would just think to myself, what am I doing? And then I'd make myself stop. But I never told anyone about that either.
You were arrested, 2012 for burglary? You remember that?
I remember I was arrested whenever I was 14, or I was arrested whenever I was 15. I was just always doing something.
What else? What other kind of stuff were you doing?
Mostly just drug abuse. Buying drugs, doing drugs, running around.
Were you selling drugs?
Sometimes if I needed a little bit extra money. I started smoking weed whenever I was 15 years old. I started using meth. First time I used meth, I was 19.
When we get into drug use and drug experimentation, we're in that novelty-seeking realm. One of the features with psychopathy can be just increased stimulation needs, that they need something new. They need something stimulating, exciting, and that can frequently be drugs. That could be a lot of other things, but we're seeing that in his own description.
There are a lot of people at church tonight. You were up there.
No, there wasn't that many people.
What was their reaction when you told them?
They all told me that I was doing the right thing. Went up to the front of the church and told everybody what I did.
I shouldn't be shocked that he did this, and we saw that troubled look in his eyes that's always been there until last Wednesday night. And he got mixed up in that experience out there at the Juvenile Detention Center. And I don't know if it surfaced in y'all's records, but he stole a gun, and all of that mess. And that was right before his 16th birthday. You could just see where he was headed. That's what hurts me, is that why I didn't pick up on that way back in May of 2016 is thinking, wonder if Ryan did that.
None of us have a crystal ball.
But he's been a troubled child from day one. I have replayed that in my mind. I didn't get that. I mean, right there at the search that Sunday afternoon, on the 15th, he was there. He was there at her service.
He was there in front of us the whole time.
Yeah.
We just never knew who he was.
You tell me how long you knew about temperature, body, or DNA, so you knew that once you started the fire, that no one ever probably would prove unless you really knew where it was. Right. You for sure. You didn't have to take a weapon in with you. So did you know there would be a weapon in there that you could use? Or did you plan on just strangling her to it? You said you had nothing, no clothes on. I felt capable of going what I want to do. At this time we have spoken, and you agreed to speak with me about what has happened. Is that correct? Yeah.
He'll tell them what he did to his wife if her ex-husband is present in the room. The power and authority that gives Barnes is significant. He is now going to not only get to relive the crime and the violence that he inflicted on his wife, but he's going to get to see the emotional reaction and trauma that it causes on her ex-husband.
Okay. We contacted Mr. Birdie. He has agreed to come to the Sheriff's Office substation and is present here in the room with us now. Mr. Barnes, this is a request that you made, is that correct? Yes, it is. I released from prison October 31st of this year. I went back to drug use. December 11th. Some coffee, a paper, 2 pounds of drugs in the house, some crack cocaine. Must have put it there prior.
He's clearly denying and minimizing and not taking responsibility and doing what a lot of drug abusers do, but also psychopaths do, blame it on something else. It's not me, it's the alcohol. And he's kind of doing the same thing. It's sort of the same script.
Got really upset. The tears. You locked the bedroom door on me, don't get out of the house. She started hitting me or knee me or something. I stepped under, got behind her, and grabbed her around the neck. And we went to the floor hard. Okay. She went face first. I held on. I saw blood. I picked her up off her feet. I don't know how she did it. She got a hold of the wall. And it took me out balance. Okay.
Barnes is trying to paint this as a simple lover's quarrel or marital disagreement when in fact there are broken doors, there's holes in the wall, there are door frames that have been removed by somebody grabbing them and kicking them in. This is not a situation of two people who had a misunderstanding that spun out of control. The intense displays of emotion that you hear in Barnes and his account are superficial at best. They're insincere, they turn on and off like a faucet of waterworks, and ultimately they're not consistent with how people display real emotions. What they are is highly consistent with how a psychopathic individual views emotions and what they think people want to hear and see. It's not uncommon when we have these types of displays of emotion that if you actually look closely, there's no tears. And we don't have a video of this point in the interview. We have an audio, but he reconstitutes pretty quickly and then immediately turns the emotions back on where he's out of control and can't even get the words out. And emotions just don't work they don't work like an on-off switch. They work like a dimmer switch. And psychopaths have a difficult time understanding that subtle reality because, again, they are mimicking what they think people experience, but because they don't experience those emotions and they don't feel them internally, they're guessing.
And you're sitting in your mind or on the floor. Her head first. We went down.
He never owns responsibility for killing her. It's a distanced description. She need him, he thinks. He pushed her down. It was hard. He doesn't know how it really happened, but she went face first. If you think of it like a painting, you're getting a very broad brushstroke of something about the scene, but you can't fill in the detail.
When I left her on the floor, she was squirming, trying to get away. You still trying to hold her? I was holding. I didn't want her to fight me no more. I didn't want her to fight back. I held on until I knew she could fight me anymore. Lynn died. What you do while you're home? I thought I could make things okay. I just started cleaning up, doing dishes. What did you do? Stay with it. Did you do anything to hide the fact that you were responsible for that? For what? For her death? No. Let me tell you something. In the recycle bins outside, why did you take the trash in the road? It's not a nice trash thing. Why do you care about the trash when your wife's dead in the house? I figured if I did, well, make it look normal. I was trying to act normal, so I stayed there all day.
The fact that Barnes continued to stay in their home for 2 days, knowing there was a dead body in the closet, and he took more care and attention to make sure that the trash was taken out, dishes were cleaned, that the home was otherwise orderly, really shows a disconnect. His feeble attempt at taking the trash out so that things look normal doesn't really compensate or equate to the loss of human life, but in his mind, they're somehow equal. They're equal gestures.
You realize what you did? You understand? Yeah. That's it. Believe it or wrong. Can't believe it happened. Everything's gone. Everything. Feels quiet. James, is that the extent of what you want to tell Tony? On tape that I just want you to know you never do anything wrong. I was sick. I was sick. She loved very much. Stop. When it came to stupid, it was just, wait, hold on. If I had told you, thought I knew a long time ago, you would have known what to do.
Barnes could be alluding to the fact that he knows more than they know. It's clear that he's saying, if you had known about what I was going to do earlier, maybe you could have done something about it. So it's a way of blaming the ex-husband as well. So he still doesn't have responsibility in his mind for what he did.
Thus concluding the interview, so switch to side B. Interview's concluded.
Barnes would have us believe this was just a domestic dispute, but we know that that's not the case. He had killed before.
Knock, knock. Come in. Oh, it was 5:14. Well, good for you. You been in confinement? Yeah. She moved tall. She went through death rows. What's that? That's body description. It's bad. Couldn't catch his breath or what. They didn't transfer me over here. Pulling this down. No. Yeah. No. Oh, okay. He's fine. He's just doing the audio. No problem. Are we on video right now? Yes. I've known you for a little more than 4 months, and I trust you. I'm talking about a matter that happened in Norway in 1988. There are no questions you could ever ask me that I would not answer.
This is once again Barnes taking control of a situation. You see his psychopathic side really take the lead. He is narcissistic, he's arrogant, and he really understands that there is a power that he has in this situation because law enforcement wants to understand what this cold case was about.
We talked before about the incident happened in 1988. You never was clear on her name. You said you read it in the newspaper or something. Yeah, I know. I take to this day, and I swear by Allah, I really don't know her. I know I've been told this several times, but I believe in it all the time.
She was Patricia Miller. She was a nurse who lived in a complex near him. It's another reflection of this complete, really, indifference to personal identity. People aren't individuals to a man like Barnes. They're things. And so you can care enough to kill somebody, but they're not really important to remember as individual people.
Sometime in April of 1988, I entered north window of condominium unit. I believe it was River Oaks condominium off Roosevelt Avenue in Florida. I proceeded through the condominium, got a knife out of the kitchen. I caught a that we were in about Barbara in her bathroom, and I took her in the bedroom. I raped her. I got some shoestrings out of tennis shoes, went back in the bedroom, I tried to her hands behind her back. I raped her again. I got her shoe up. I tried to strangle her to death. It didn't happen, and I ended up being death with a hammer back to the head.
There's a lot of sadism. He enjoyed humiliating her. He enjoyed hurting her physically. He enjoyed frightening her. And it was a prolonged several hours before he finally killed her. And he killed in a very personal, frightening way where she was probably experiencing her own death. So intense rage and a deep desire for destruction of the other person.
I went through her condominium. I took a bank card and took out the wallet. I can't remember if I took the wallet around it or not. I put all the items I thought I had touched inside the rucksack. I went outside as I had entered naked. I got off the got a lighter and cigarette, came back in through the front door and set it on fire. And then I got dressed real quickly and I left. I didn't believe I locked the front door as I went out. And that's what I did.
Despite the fact that almost 17 years have gone by from when he committed this violent murder, and when he's talking about it during this interview with Insco, he remembers things in a level of detail about taking a bank card, putting things in a rucksack, where he exited the house, whether he left the door locked or unlocked. Barnes has been reliving this crime in his mind, getting a euphoria or a high off of it all these years.
What makes you think about getting naked before you went in there? How did you get the window? You said it was a security system. Well, I don't know if there was an arm system or anything. I had a good chance. But there was. I had to slip my ID. Your lock a little bit, cash, and just slip it out. The reason why I got dressed before I went in was I didn't want to carry any material into that place. Now, my intent when I went was to kill. So your intent on the record? Not my intent was to kill.
The decision that Barnes made to enter the victim's apartment nude suggests that he had a clear intent to sexually assault her. This is a calculated, cold act. This is somebody who doesn't have any attachment to the victim. It was about his own sexual gratification, his own power and control, and his need to kill.
What was on the victim? Did you call fire? Was it a sheet, a comforter or something? I believe it was a comforter on the north end in the middle of the bed. It started on fire. Why did you do this? I was assuming I started on fire before using the same exact no one once. At the Woodfield Estates, I actually got arrested for first-degree arson, but pretty guilty somehow. Set a bed on fire for the morning. And when I was a kid, next to our neighbor's house, I set that bed on fire.
Barnes starts talking about how he has set fires before. He's set fires when he's a kid. He's burned a bed before. This is consistent with what we know in the psychological research on people with psychopathy, is they've often engaged in other acts of violence before they moved on to torturing humans or killing humans.
You told me once that you knew about temperature, vibe, or DNA, so you knew that once you started a fire, no one ever probably would prove dumbness until you get break the walls. Right. You for sure. You didn't have to take a weapon in with you. So did you know there would be a weapon in there that you could use? Or did you plan on just strangling her? You said you had nothing with no clothes on. I felt capable of going.
Part of the control dynamic is in planning the hunt, right? Planning the action. They've had a fantasy in their head about how it should proceed and go, the stages that the act will occur in, and they mentally rehearse it.
When did you decide to kill her? I'm not bringing me up before you, but you mentioned that she humiliated you before, and no, they had. You know, I did. I killed her, and I made that decision. But I think it would be very best that I didn't mention our encounter and how I felt when she said it, because I don't want to diminish, anybody. I don't want to put anybody on the best perspective what I did, and I did. I just not really want to answer that.
This is where we see truly the presentation of a psychopathic personality. He does not owe anyone anything, and as long as he maintains control of the interview, he's good to go. But the minute they start asking him about things that he looks bad or somehow diminish his status and his sense of authority and compromise his ego and his self-esteem, he won't go there. So despite claiming that he would say to Insco, "I'll answer anything," he's clearly not willing to.
Why did you decide to kill her? That's one of those questions. Why did you?
He doesn't want to talk probably about rejection, about being humiliated. He clearly remembers what she said 17 years ago, and it makes him feel so small and squeamish that he's able to talk about killing her, but he can't talk about how rejection made him feel, because it made him feel like nothing. It made him feel so bad. And because that moment is so difficult for him, so humiliating, he rewrites the story to say that I'm actually protecting her reputation.
And why was it so important for you to try to help him?
It seemed like that I've been haunted. There's the right way and wrong way, no the right way. You think that I'm not a real person because I hide stuff like this. I'll do that once in a while. And that's exactly what I do.
This is another example of the control and the appearance of something being perhaps socially appropriate. Barnes is almost saying, I have a spiritual advisor, I'm a spiritual person, think of me in this way, but he's not. We don't see any signs of contriteness or remorse. It still is all about him rather than the victims themselves.
But I'll tell you something. You know the saying, I'm all in. Yes. I'm all in anyway. And there's a couple of matters that I was wrong with you. But
June 2014. On the rugged western coast of New Zealand's North Island, winter had settled over the land like a heavy grey blanket. The sky hung low above the rolling hills of Taranaki, pressing shadows across paddocks soaked by weeks of rain. The wind moved relentlessly across the countryside, bending fences, rattling farm sheds, and carrying the scent of wet earth all the way to the black volcanic coastline where the Tasman Sea crashed endlessly against the rocks. In a place like this, people noticed when something was wrong. Not immediately. Not in the dramatic way it happens in movies. The countryside had its own rhythm. Farmers disappeared for a day to work distant paddocks. Neighbors could go a week without seeing one another. Mobile phone reception faded in certain valleys. Vehicles traveled lonely roads where hours could pass without another car appearing in the rearview mirror. But eventually, silence begins to sound different. And when it does, people start asking questions. The questions surrounding 27-year-old Aaron Roigard began quietly. A missed phone call. An unanswered text message. A conversation that never happened. A routine that suddenly stopped. At first, nobody imagined that those small details would grow into one of New Zealand's most disturbing murder investigations. Nobody could have predicted that the case would eventually lead detectives through a maze of lies, financial deception, family betrayal, and a chilling possibility almost too terrible to accept. Because the person at the center of suspicion would not be a stranger. Not a drifter. Not a criminal lurking in the darkness. The trail would eventually point toward the man who should have protected Aaron from the world. His own father. Years later, courtrooms would be filled with lawyers, investigators, journalists, and grieving relatives attempting to reconstruct what happened during those final days. Witnesses would testify. Financial records would be dissected line by line. Detectives would spend countless hours piecing together fragments of a life that had suddenly vanished. Yet despite all of that effort, one crucial piece of the puzzle would remain missing. Aaron Roigard's body. No grave. No remains. No final resting place. Just an absence. An empty space where a son should have been. The mystery of that absence would haunt everyone connected to the case. Even now, more than a decade later, nobody outside the killer truly knows where Aaron lies. Perhaps beneath dense farmland hidden from view. Perhaps somewhere along the wild coastline where waves pound the cliffs day and night. Perhaps in a place searched repeatedly by investigators who unknowingly stood only meters away. The truth disappeared with him. And that is what makes this story so unsettling. Most murder cases begin with a body. A discovery. A crime scene. A victim found. This case began with nothing. Nothing except silence. Silence from a young man who had every reason to keep living. Silence from a phone that stopped ringing. Silence from bank accounts that suddenly went untouched. Silence from a future that vanished without explanation. To understand how that silence emerged, we have to travel back to the windswept farmlands of Taranaki, where generations of families built lives from hard work and perseverance. The Roigards were known in the region. Like many farming families, their lives were deeply connected to the land. Farms in New Zealand are often more than businesses. They are inheritances. Legacies. Identities passed from one generation to the next. The land shapes the people who work it. Early mornings. Long days. Physical exhaustion. A stubborn independence. Those who thrive in such environments learn resilience quickly. From a distance, the Roygard family's life appeared ordinary. A father. A son. A farm. Responsibilities shared across seasons. Nothing about their story suggested it would one day become national news. Nothing hinted at the darkness growing beneath the surface. Yet hidden beneath appearances, relationships can fracture. Resentments can deepen. Secrets can accumulate quietly for years. And sometimes the most dangerous conflicts are the ones nobody else can see. Because families often become experts at hiding their wounds. Neighbors see smiles. Friends hear reassuring words. Relatives assume everything is fine. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, tensions continue building. Pressure after pressure. Argument after argument. Lie after lie. Until eventually something breaks. When detectives later examined the Roygard family dynamic, they discovered a relationship far more complicated than outsiders realized. Money was involved. Trust was involved. Expectations were involved. The kind of deeply personal issues that cut far deeper than disagreements between strangers. The tragedy of this case is not simply that a young man disappeared. The tragedy is that the person prosecutors would later accuse of orchestrating his death was someone Aaron had known his entire life. Someone whose voice he recognized before he could speak. Someone who watched him grow from childhood into adulthood. Someone who shared meals with him. Worked beside him. Spoke to him as family. There is something uniquely disturbing about crimes committed within families. A stranger can take a life. But betrayal changes the shape of the crime entirely. Because betrayal destroys more than a victim. It destroys trust itself. Imagine, for a moment, the final hours before a disappearance. Nothing appears unusual from the outside. The sky is grey. The wind is blowing. Farm work continues. Animals need feeding. Machinery needs maintaining. The routines of rural life move forward exactly as they always have. Yet somewhere within those ordinary moments, events are unfolding that will alter countless lives forever. A future jury will spend weeks trying to identify those moments. Detectives will revisit them repeatedly. Journalists will analyze them. Family members will replay them endlessly in their minds. Was there an argument? A confrontation? A realization that could not be taken back? What exactly happened during those final hours? Those questions would become the heartbeat of the investigation. Because without a body, investigators faced an enormous challenge. In most homicide cases, physical evidence speaks loudly. A victim tells part of the story simply by being found. In this case, investigators had no such advantage. Instead, they were forced to build a picture from fragments. Behavior. Timelines. Financial transactions. Witness statements. Contradictions. Patterns. Tiny details that individually seemed insignificant but collectively painted a far darker picture. The investigation would become an exercise in patience. A battle against uncertainty. A search for truth in a landscape where crucial evidence had seemingly vanished. And while detectives searched, another question emerged. If Aaron had simply left voluntarily, why had he abandoned everything? His phone. His finances. His connections. His future plans. Human beings disappear for many reasons. Some start new lives. Some run from debt. Some escape difficult circumstances. But those disappearances usually leave traces. Aaron's disappearance left something else. A void. The kind of void that experienced investigators learn to fear. Because sometimes absence is evidence. Sometimes what doesn't happen becomes more important than what does. A phone never switched on again. A bank account never accessed again. A conversation never completed. A life interrupted so completely that it seemed to stop in a single instant. As days became weeks, concern transformed into alarm. As weeks became months, alarm transformed into suspicion. And as suspicion deepened, investigators found themselves confronting a possibility almost impossible to comprehend. What if Aaron had not vanished? What if someone had made sure he could never return? The answer would lead them toward allegations of greed, toward accusations of calculated deception, toward claims that thousands of dollars had disappeared long before Aaron did. Money has a peculiar way of exposing character. It reveals priorities. It tests loyalty. It magnifies desperation. Again and again throughout criminal history, investigators have followed financial trails directly to the truth. What initially appears to be a disappearance often becomes something else once the numbers are examined. Accounts, withdrawals, transfers, missing funds. Financial records do not forget. They preserve decisions long after memories fade. And in this case, the money would eventually become one of the most important clues of all. But that revelation was still far in the future. At the beginning, there was only uncertainty. Only questions. Only the growing realization that something was terribly wrong. Far out across the Taranaki countryside, winter storms continued rolling inland from the Tasman Sea. Rain swept across fields. Mud collected in tire tracks. The landscape carried on exactly as it always had. Nature showed no sign that a human life had vanished. The sheep continued grazing. The cattle continued feeding. The waves continued breaking against the coast. Yet somewhere within that vast landscape, a secret was being hidden. A secret that would challenge investigators for years. A secret buried so effectively that even after a murder conviction, one essential question would remain unanswered. Where is Aaron Roigard? That question lingered over every stage of the case. It hovered above every search operation, every witness interview, every courtroom session, every newspaper headline. And it remains unanswered today. Because while justice would eventually arrive in a courtroom, certainty never arrived in the fields of Taranaki. Somewhere in that cold New Zealand winter, a young man disappeared. No final goodbye. No explanation. No trace that could conclusively reveal his fate. Only a mystery. Only silence. And hidden within that silence was a story so disturbing that it would ultimately force an entire nation to confront one of the darkest possibilities imaginable. What happens when the greatest threat to a son is not a stranger in the shadows, but the father standing beside him? Long before detectives arrived. Long before courtrooms debated evidence. Long before the name Aaron Roigard appeared in headlines across New Zealand, there was only the land. Taranaki is the kind of place that seems almost untouched by time. Situated on the western side of New Zealand's North Island, the region is dominated by the towering presence of Mount Taranaki, a near-perfect volcanic cone that rises dramatically above the surrounding countryside. On clear mornings, the mountain appears almost unreal, standing watch over thousands of hectares of farmland stretching toward the sea. Its snow-covered peak catches the first light of dawn while mist lingers in the valleys below. To visitors, the landscape feels peaceful. To locals, it is simply home. The roads wind through green pastures bordered by fences weathered from decades of wind and rain. Dairy farms dominate the region. Herds of cattle move slowly across rolling hills. Tractors crawl through muddy fields. Farmhouses sit scattered across the countryside, often separated by kilometers of open land. Life here follows rhythms older than modern technology. The alarm clock rings before sunrise. The animals do not care whether it is a holiday. The weather dictates schedules more than calendars. A storm can alter an entire week's plans. A drought can threaten livelihoods. A good season can make a family prosperous. A bad one can leave scars lasting years. People who grow up in farming communities learn these realities early. Work comes first. Comfort comes second. The land gives opportunities, but it demands sacrifice. Those values shaped generations of families throughout Taranaki, including the Roigards. The Roigard family had roots tied deeply to the farming world. Agriculture was not merely an occupation. It was a way of life. Every fence line, every paddock, every piece of machinery represented years of labor and investment. From the outside, there was nothing extraordinary about their circumstances. In fact, that normality would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Because evil rarely announces itself. Most people imagine dangerous individuals as obviously threatening. They imagine monsters who stand apart from society. Reality is often different. Sometimes darkness hides inside ordinary routines. Inside ordinary homes. Inside ordinary families. And nowhere is that concealment easier than in isolated rural communities where privacy is abundant and neighbors tend to mind their own business. The region around Opunake reflected that rural independence. Opunake itself was a small coastal town, home to only a few thousand residents. It sat between farmland and ocean, where black sand beaches met powerful waves rolling in from the Tasman Sea. Visitors passing through might notice the dramatic coastline first. Locals noticed practical things. Weather forecasts. Fuel prices. Livestock markets. Road conditions. The concerns of daily life. News traveled quickly in communities like these, but personal matters often remained private. Families handled their own problems. Arguments stayed behind closed doors. Appearances mattered. Maintaining stability mattered. People could know one another for decades without ever understanding what happened inside a particular household. That reality would later become crucial. Because when investigators eventually began examining the relationship between Aaron and his father, they found a story hidden beneath years of familiar routines. To understand that relationship, it is important to understand the environment that shaped it. Farming is demanding work. There are no weekends in the traditional sense. Animals must be fed. Equipment must be repaired. Weather must be monitored. Unexpected problems emerge constantly. A broken fence can become an emergency. A sick animal can become a financial loss. Machinery failures can disrupt entire operations. Many farming families spend more time working together than most families spend living together. That closeness can strengthen relationships. It can also intensify tensions. Small disagreements become difficult to escape when two people share both family ties and business responsibilities. A conflict at breakfast follows you into the paddock. An argument in the afternoon returns at dinner. Distance becomes impossible. For some families, that creates unity. For others, it creates pressure. Pressure that builds slowly, year after year. Aaron Roigard grew up in this environment. The countryside was familiar to him. The rhythms of rural life were familiar. The responsibilities were familiar. He understood the realities of farming because they had surrounded him for most of his life. The landscape that outsiders saw as picturesque was simply part of his daily existence. The muddy boots near the doorway. The smell of machinery oil. The endless horizon of green fields. The cold mornings before sunrise. The physical exhaustion at the end of a long day. These details formed the backdrop of his world. And because they were ordinary, they rarely attracted attention. Nobody looking at the Roigard family from a distance would have predicted what lay ahead. There were no flashing warning signs visible to outsiders. No dramatic public confrontations. No obvious indicators of a tragedy waiting to happen. Instead, there was routine. The most deceptive thing in the world. Routine creates assumptions. When people follow the same patterns day after day, others stop paying close attention. A familiar vehicle parked outside a farmhouse attracts no notice. A father and son working together seems unremarkable. A quiet life appears stable. Yet beneath routine, problems can grow unnoticed. Financial pressure is one of the most common. The economics of farming are rarely simple. Income can fluctuate dramatically depending on market conditions, weather patterns, and operational costs. Debt is often unavoidable. Loans become necessary. Margins become tight. Decisions made years earlier can continue influencing the future. Money creates stress. Stress influences behavior, and behavior reveals character. Though much of what happened behind closed doors would only emerge later, investigators would eventually uncover evidence suggesting that financial issues had become deeply intertwined with the relationship between father and son. But in 2014, those revelations were still hidden. The countryside remained unaware. The community remained unaware. Even many people who knew the family remained unaware. The days passed as they always had. Winter settled across Taranaki. Rain swept over farmland. Clouds gathered around the slopes of Mount Taranaki. The sea continued crashing against the shoreline. Nature moved forward with complete indifference to human secrets. One of the most striking aspects of rural New Zealand is its isolation. A person can stand alone in a paddock and see nobody for kilometers. At night, darkness arrives completely. Streetlights disappear. City noise vanishes. Only the wind remains. Only distant animal sounds. Only the vast emptiness of open land. That isolation can feel peaceful. It can also conceal things remarkably well. Evidence. Confrontations. Crimes. Entire stories can unfold far from witnesses. For investigators, rural cases often present unique challenges. There are fewer cameras. Fewer people. Fewer opportunities for someone to observe a crucial moment. When a person disappears in a city, hundreds of eyes may unknowingly capture pieces of the timeline. In remote farmland, those eyes often do not exist. This would become one of the greatest obstacles facing the investigation. The landscape itself seemed determined to keep its secrets. Fields stretched endlessly. Roads disappeared into the distance. Farm buildings stood isolated against the horizon. The sheer scale of the environment complicated every search effort. Yet despite that isolation, communities like Opunake possess another characteristic. People notice patterns. They may not interfere in private matters, but they observe. They remember. They recognize when someone behaves differently. They notice when familiar routines suddenly stop. That awareness would eventually become important. Because when Aaron vanished, people began comparing what they expected to see with what they actually saw. And the differences became difficult to ignore. But before suspicion emerged, before investigators assembled timelines, before courtrooms heard testimony, there existed only an ordinary winter in rural New Zealand. A season like countless others. Cold mornings. Grey skies. Wet roads. Farm work. Daily responsibilities. Nothing outwardly dramatic. Nothing visibly extraordinary. Yet hidden beneath that ordinary surface was a story already moving toward catastrophe. A story involving trust. A story involving money. A story involving family. And like so many tragedies, it unfolded in a setting where everyone assumed they understood the people involved. That assumption would prove disastrously wrong. Because somewhere among the green fields of Taranaki, behind familiar routines and ordinary appearances, events were quietly taking shape that would eventually shatter a family forever. The land remained silent. The sea remained silent. The mountain remained silent. And in that silence, the stage was being set for a disappearance that would leave behind one of New Zealand's most haunting unanswered questions. Every true crime story eventually arrives at a crossroads. One path focuses on the crime. The other focuses on the person who was lost. The first path often attracts the most attention. It is filled with mystery, suspects, evidence, courtroom drama, and unanswered questions. The second path is quieter. It asks a different question. Who was the victim before tragedy entered their life? Because long before Aaron Roigard became a missing person, long before detectives searched fields and examined financial records, he was simply a young man trying to build a future. That future mattered. His dreams mattered. His life mattered. And understanding who Aaron was helps reveal the true scale of what was taken away. At 27 years old, Aaron stood at an age when many people begin defining the next chapter of their lives. The uncertainty of adolescence is gone. The possibilities of adulthood remain open. Choices about career, relationships, independence, and long-term goals become increasingly important. For Aaron, much of life revolved around the farming world he had known since childhood. The rural environment shaped him in countless ways. People raised on farms often develop qualities that outsiders sometimes overlook. Patience, persistence, self-reliance, an ability to work through discomfort, a willingness to face difficult conditions without complaint. Farm life rarely rewards laziness. The work begins whether you feel motivated or not. Animals need attention every day. Machinery breaks unexpectedly. Weather creates challenges that cannot be postponed. People who grow up within that environment learn responsibility early. Aaron was part of that world. The countryside was not merely scenery to him. It was familiar ground. The roads, the paddocks, the farm equipment, the routines. These were not exotic experiences. They were everyday life. When the sun rose over the rolling fields of Taranaki, countless tasks waited to be completed. Work often began before many people in cities had even left their beds. Cold mornings were common. Rain was common. Mud was common. Yet life continued. And Aaron continued with it. What makes cases like this particularly heartbreaking is the contrast between ordinary aspirations and extraordinary tragedy. Most victims of violent crime are not living dramatic lives. They are not action heroes. They are not celebrities. They are ordinary people making plans for ordinary tomorrows. Aaron's story appears to fit that pattern. He was not known nationally. He was not seeking attention. He was not preparing for fame. He was living a life that, from the outside, seemed grounded in familiar routines and future possibilities. Those who knew him described someone with connections, relationships, and a place within his community. That detail matters. Because one of the first questions investigators ask in any disappearance is whether the missing person had reasons to leave voluntarily. Did they intend to start over somewhere else? Did they cut ties intentionally? Did they abandon their previous life by choice? As detectives would later discover, Aaron's disappearance did not fit comfortably into those explanations. Nothing about his behavior suggested someone preparing to erase himself from existence. Instead, the available evidence pointed in the opposite direction. His life appeared to be moving forward. His future remained active. His connections remained intact. That reality would become increasingly significant as the investigation unfolded. But before detectives reached those conclusions, Aaron was simply living his life one day at a time. The details of daily existence are often the first things lost when a person disappears. People remember headlines. They remember trials. They remember shocking revelations. Yet the small human details matter just as much. The conversations. The habits. The routines. The plans that never happened. Imagine an ordinary evening before the disappearance. The sky darkens over Taranaki. The wind moves across open farmland. Lights glow from distant homes scattered across the countryside. Somewhere in that landscape, Aaron is living what appears to be another normal day. Perhaps discussing work. Perhaps making future plans. Perhaps thinking about problems that seemed important at the time. Like everyone else, he could not know that those ordinary moments would soon become memories. That is one of the cruelest realities of sudden tragedy. The final normal day never announces itself. No warning appears. No signal arrives. People continue living as they always have, unaware that certain conversations are happening for the last time. Certain plans will never be completed. Certain goodbyes will never be spoken. For Aaron's loved ones, that realization would become painful in the years ahead. Human memory has a tendency to revisit final interactions repeatedly. A last phone call. A last meeting. A last conversation. People replay them endlessly, searching for clues that were invisible at the time. Was there something unusual? Something overlooked? Something that should have stood out? Most often, the answer is no. Life simply appeared normal until it suddenly wasn't. As investigators later reconstructed Aaron's final known period, they found no convincing evidence of a man preparing to vanish voluntarily. His behavior did not resemble someone planning a secret departure. His financial activity did not support such a theory. His communication patterns did not support it either. Instead, there was an abrupt stop. An interruption. A sudden silence. That silence became one of the strongest indicators that something terrible had occurred. Because people do not simply disappear from their own lives without leaving traces behind. Especially not people who maintain relationships, responsibilities, and future expectations. Aaron had connections to the world around him. And those connections became alarmed when he vanished. Concern rarely appears instantly in missing person cases. At first, people create explanations. Maybe he's busy. Maybe his phone battery died. Maybe he's working somewhere with poor reception. Maybe he'll call tomorrow. These explanations feel reasonable because they usually are. Most missed calls have innocent explanations. Most delayed responses mean nothing. Most temporary disappearances end quickly. But eventually concern begins to grow. Hours become days. Days become weeks. The silence becomes impossible to ignore. For those who cared about Aaron, that progression would be agonizing. Every unanswered message increased uncertainty. Every passing day deepened worry. Every failed attempt at contact raised new questions. What had happened? Where was he? Why was nobody hearing from him? The human mind struggles with uncertainty. Grief is painful, but uncertainty creates its own unique form of suffering. Families facing unexplained disappearances often describe living between hope and fear. One moment they imagine a positive explanation. The next moment they fear the worst. Back and forth. Day after day. Week after week. The absence becomes a constant presence. For Aaron's loved ones, that uncertainty would eventually evolve into something even more devastating. The growing realization that he might never return. Yet even as investigators pursued that possibility, they continued searching for answers. Because Aaron deserved answers. Every victim does. When someone disappears under suspicious circumstances, the investigation becomes more than a search for evidence. It becomes an effort to restore the victim's voice. To tell their story. To explain what happened when they can no longer explain it themselves. Aaron could not speak for himself. He could not describe his final movements. He could not identify who harmed him. He could not reveal where his body had been taken. Others would have to uncover those truths. And that task would prove extraordinarily difficult. One of the haunting aspects of this case is that Aaron's physical absence forced investigators to rely heavily on the life he left behind. His habits became evidence. His routines became evidence. His financial activity became evidence. His relationships became evidence. Everything he did while alive helped investigators understand what likely happened after he disappeared. In that sense, Aaron continued helping the investigation even when he was no longer there. Every record, every timeline, every interaction, each became part of a larger picture. A picture that slowly contradicted the idea of a voluntary disappearance. A picture that pointed somewhere far darker. But before the investigation reached those conclusions, before prosecutors built their case, before a jury weighed the evidence, there was simply a young man whose future had been stolen. A son. A family member. A member of a rural community. A person who should have had decades ahead of him. When discussing true crime, it is easy to become consumed by the mystery. The suspect. The motive. The investigation. The courtroom battle. Yet at the center of every case stands a victim whose life extended far beyond the circumstances of their death. Aaron was more than a missing person file. More than a court exhibit. More than a headline. He was a living human being whose story did not begin with tragedy. And that truth is essential. Because the value of a life cannot be measured solely by the way it ends. It is measured by the years that came before. The experiences. The relationships. The hopes. The future that should have existed. Somewhere in the fields of Taranaki, Aaron spent countless ordinary days that never appeared in newspapers. Days filled with work, conversations, plans, frustrations, and small victories. Days that seemed unremarkable at the time. Days that later became precious because they could never happen again. The tragedy of his disappearance is not only that a young man vanished. The tragedy is that every possibility attached to his future vanished with him. Every birthday he would never celebrate. Every achievement he would never reach. Every relationship he would never deepen. Every year he would never experience. Those losses are impossible to calculate. They exist only in imagination. In futures that were denied the chance to become reality. And as concern surrounding Aaron's disappearance continued growing throughout 2014, one terrible possibility slowly emerged from the shadows. If Aaron had not chosen to leave, if Aaron had not abandoned his own life, then someone else had intervened. Someone else had made a decision that permanently altered the future. Someone who understood exactly what they were taking away. The investigation would eventually focus on uncovering that person's identity. But before detectives followed the trail of evidence, before financial records revealed hidden tensions, before suspicion turned toward an unimaginable suspect, the story remained centered on one painful reality. A 27-year-old man had disappeared. The people who loved him were waiting for answers. And somewhere beyond the rolling hills and storm-covered skies of Taranaki, the truth remained hidden. Every disappearance has a final day. A final morning. A final afternoon. A final moment when the missing person is still part of the ordinary world. People speak to them. They move through familiar places. They continue routines that seem completely normal. Nobody realizes that history is quietly narrowing toward a point of no return. For Aaron Roigard, that moment arrived during the cold New Zealand winter of June 2014. The exact details of what happened remain hidden. That uncertainty would become one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. No eyewitness stepped forward to describe a murder. No surveillance camera captured the crime. No confession revealed the full sequence of events. The truth would have to be reconstructed from fragments. Pieces of evidence. Behavioral clues. Financial records. Timelines. And perhaps most importantly, the silence that followed. Because after a certain point in June 2014, Aaron simply vanished. Not gradually. Not in stages. Abruptly. The transition was so complete that investigators would later view it as one of the strongest indicators that something catastrophic had occurred. People do not usually disappear from their own lives without leaving traces behind. Yet that was exactly what appeared to happen. Imagine the countryside around Opunake during those days. Winter clouds drifted across the horizon. Rain periodically swept through the region. Farm tracks became muddy. The wind moved constantly across open paddocks. The landscape itself offered countless places where a person could work unseen for hours. A vehicle could travel along rural roads without attracting attention. A conversation could occur beyond the sight of neighbors. A confrontation could unfold far from witnesses. The isolation that made rural life attractive also created opportunities for secrets. Somewhere within that environment, Aaron was last seen alive. At the time, nothing about the moment appeared historic. No dramatic announcement followed. No emergency call was made. Life seemed to continue normally. But later, when detectives began retracing his movements, they discovered something deeply troubling. The timeline simply stopped. The chain of ordinary activity ended. The future disappeared. Investigators often describe violent crime as creating a rupture in normal behavior. Human beings leave patterns. We create routines. We generate activity. We communicate. We spend money. We travel. We interact with others. When a person suddenly ceases all of those activities simultaneously, alarm bells begin ringing. Aaron's case displayed precisely that pattern. The silence that followed his disappearance was total. His phone stopped being used. His bank activity stopped. His contact with others stopped. His visible presence in the world stopped. It was as though someone had reached into reality and erased him from his own story. At first, however, no one knew that. The final day did not come with a label attached. People experiencing ordinary life rarely understand which moments will later become critical evidence. A conversation that seemed insignificant suddenly becomes important. A vehicle sighting becomes important. A routine activity becomes important. Detectives would eventually examine every available detail from those days, attempting to determine exactly when Aaron's life intersected with whatever fate awaited him. What happened during those final hours? That question became the center of the investigation. And despite years of scrutiny, some aspects remain unknown even today. What investigators ultimately proposed was chilling. According to the prosecution's theory, Aaron did not vanish randomly. He did not encounter a stranger. He did not become the victim of chance. Instead, they argued that events had been building long before June 2014. Beneath the surface of everyday life, tensions already existed. Financial issues. Questions of trust. Secrets that threatened to emerge. The disappearance, according to prosecutors, was not spontaneous chaos. It was the culmination of hidden problems that had reached a breaking point. But in those immediate moments, nobody outside the situation understood that possibility. The countryside remained quiet. The farm remained quiet. And somewhere inside that quietness, a young man ceased to exist in the public world. One of the most disturbing elements of many family-related homicide cases is their apparent normality before the crime. There are rarely dramatic warning signs visible to outsiders. No flashing signals. No cinematic confrontations. Instead, life appears ordinary right up until the moment it doesn't. People continue eating meals, completing chores, making plans, discussing the future. Then suddenly, someone is gone. The contrast creates a kind of psychological shock. How could something so terrible emerge from something so familiar? That question would echo throughout the Roygard case. Because the allegation that eventually emerged was almost impossible to comprehend. The person accused was not an enemy. Not a stranger. Not a criminal outsider. The person accused was Aaron's father. The accusation carried a particular kind of horror. Society is built upon assumptions regarding family. Parents protect children. Parents provide guidance. Parents offer support. Even when relationships become strained, those expectations remain deeply embedded in the human mind. Cases involving violence within families feel uniquely disturbing because they violate those expectations. They force people to confront uncomfortable truths about trust. Trust is powerful precisely because it lowers defenses. People allow family members access that strangers never receive. They share information, property, responsibilities, financial arrangements, personal vulnerabilities. The closer the relationship, the greater the trust. And when that trust is exploited, the damage extends far beyond physical harm. It strikes directly at the foundations of human connection. If prosecutors were correct, Aaron's final days unfolded within that reality. A reality where danger came not from outside the family but from within it. Of course, none of this was visible at the time. The disappearance entered the world first as uncertainty. Not murder. Not even necessarily a crime. Just uncertainty. Yet uncertainty has a strange way of evolving. As days pass without answers, people begin comparing possibilities. What explanation fits the evidence? Which scenarios remain realistic? Which scenarios become less believable? In Aaron's case, the disappearance itself gradually became suspicious. The longer he remained absent, the harder it became to imagine an innocent explanation. His life had not been packed into boxes. There were no signs of preparation. No indication that he intended to cut ties and vanish. The silence contradicted the idea of a voluntary departure. And that contradiction continued growing stronger. For loved ones, This period was undoubtedly agonizing. Hope and fear often coexist during missing person investigations. Every ringing phone becomes significant. Every rumor becomes significant. Every reported sighting becomes significant. People cling to possibilities because the alternative is unbearable. Perhaps he will call tomorrow. Perhaps he simply needs time. Perhaps there is an explanation nobody has considered. Those hopes persist until evidence begins pushing in a darker direction. For investigators, however, emotions must eventually yield to facts. And the facts surrounding Aaron's disappearance were becoming increasingly troubling. No activity. No communication. No trace. No convincing evidence of life after the last known sightings. Experienced detectives recognize certain patterns. When adults voluntarily disappear, they usually leave behind evidence of continued existence somewhere. A financial transaction. A communication. A movement. Something. Aaron left nothing. The absence became impossible to ignore. As authorities began examining the timeline more closely, attention naturally shifted toward the people who had been closest to him during his final known period. Who saw him last? Who spoke with him last? Who benefited from his disappearance? Who had knowledge of his routines? Who possessed opportunity? Those questions would eventually guide the investigation toward a deeply uncomfortable conclusion. But before that conclusion emerged, detectives still faced a significant obstacle. There was no body. That fact cannot be overstated. A body often provides answers. Cause of death. Time of death. Physical evidence. In this case, investigators had none of those advantages. Instead, they faced a mystery built almost entirely from absence. No remains. No crime scene clearly identified. No direct witness testimony. Only a vanished man and a growing sense that something terrible had happened. The challenge was enormous. Yet sometimes human behavior reveals truths that physical evidence cannot. What people do after a disappearance matters. What they say matters. What they fail to say matters. Investigators began paying close attention to those details. Patterns emerged. Questions multiplied. And slowly, the theory of the case began taking shape. If Aaron had been killed, then someone had successfully hidden both the crime and the body. That required planning, knowledge, opportunity, the ability to operate without attracting suspicion. The rural setting offered possibilities. The isolation offered possibilities. The familiarity of the environment offered possibilities. Someone who understood the land could potentially conceal evidence in ways outsiders never could. Those realities transformed the investigation from a simple missing person inquiry into something far more sinister. Because once detectives started considering homicide seriously, every unanswered question became heavier. Every gap in the timeline became more important. Every inconsistency demanded explanation. The final known days of Aaron's life became the foundation upon which the entire case would be built. Yet despite years of investigation, one terrible truth remained. Nobody could tell Aaron's final moments with certainty. No one knows exactly what he saw. No one knows exactly what he heard. No one knows whether he recognized the danger before it arrived. Those moments disappeared with him. Hidden somewhere beyond the reach of evidence. Hidden somewhere within a landscape that has guarded its secrets for years. And perhaps that is what makes this chapter of the story so unsettling. The crime itself exists largely in shadows. A missing timeline. A missing body. A missing voice. All that remains are the consequences. A young man vanished. A family was shattered. A community was left searching for answers. And somewhere in the cold winter of 2014, amid the windswept fields and isolated roads of Taranaki, the ordinary rhythm of life quietly gave way to something far darker. The disappearance was no longer simply a mystery. It was becoming the opening chapter of a murder investigation that would eventually shock New Zealand and expose a betrayal almost beyond belief. The most difficult investigations often begin not with what investigators find, but with what they fail to find. A body is not discovered. A crime scene is not obvious. A weapon is not recovered. Instead, detectives are confronted by an absence so complete that proving a crime occurred becomes a challenge in itself. That was the reality facing investigators in the weeks following Aaron Roigard's disappearance. At first, the situation resembled many other missing person cases. A young man could not be located. Attempts to contact him were unsuccessful. Family members and people connected to him became increasingly concerned. Police began asking questions. The early stages of any disappearance investigation are filled with uncertainty. Detectives cannot afford to make assumptions. People vanish for many reasons. Some leave voluntarily. Some experience accidents. Some suffer mental health crises. Others become victims of crime. The challenge is determining which explanation fits the available facts. In Aaron's case, investigators started where they always start. Timelines. Phone records. Financial activity. Witness accounts. Known movements. Relationships. Every detail matters because every detail helps answer a simple but critical question. What happened after Aaron was last seen? As officers worked through those questions, concern began to deepen. The expected signs of continued life were missing. No meaningful communication. No financial transactions. No evidence suggesting Aaron had deliberately started over somewhere else. The silence that had initially seemed unusual was becoming alarming. For experienced investigators, human behavior often speaks louder than dramatic evidence. Most people remain connected to the routines of their lives. They use phones. They spend money. They communicate with friends. They maintain habits. Even individuals who intentionally disappear often leave traces behind. Aaron appeared to leave none. That realization transformed the nature of the inquiry. Detectives began considering possibilities that nobody wanted to contemplate. If Aaron had not chosen to disappear, then what had happened to him? The answer could be hidden anywhere within the vast landscape of Taranaki. And so the search began. The countryside surrounding Opionake is both beautiful and unforgiving. Rolling farmland stretches toward the horizon. Creeks cut through remote areas. Patches of dense vegetation interrupt open fields. Coastal cliffs overlook powerful ocean waters. Roads snake through isolated sections of countryside where few people travel. To an investigator, every one of those locations represents a possibility. Every paddock. Every ditch. Every abandoned structure. Every remote corner of land. When a missing person vanishes in a rural environment, the search area can become overwhelming. Thousands of hectares. Countless hiding places. Endless possibilities. Yet officers pressed forward. Ground searches were organized. Resources were deployed. Investigators worked methodically through the available information. The hope remained that Aaron would be found. Perhaps injured. Perhaps stranded. Perhaps alive. As days turned into weeks, however, optimism became increasingly difficult to maintain. Nothing was found. No clear trace. No definitive clue. Only more questions. Search operations often carry a unique emotional weight. Participants understand that every hour matters. Every location searched could hold an answer. Volunteers and officers walk through fields knowing they may discover something life-changing. Sometimes that discovery brings relief. Sometimes it brings heartbreak. In Aaron's case, neither occurred. The searches yielded only silence. And silence can be deeply frustrating. Especially when investigators become convinced that a crime has occurred. Police expanded their efforts. The search extended beyond fields and roads. Resources were directed toward coastal areas. Air searches examined sections of terrain difficult to access on foot. Attention moved across land and sea. Yet the result remained the same. Aaron was nowhere to be found. One of the defining characteristics of this case emerged during this stage. The complete absence of physical remains. No body. No grave. No obvious disposal site. Nothing that could conclusively explain what happened. For investigators, that reality created two simultaneous challenges. First, they needed to determine whether Aaron was the victim of homicide. Second, they needed to identify who was responsible. Normally, a body helps answer both questions. Without one, every conclusion must be built carefully from indirect evidence. The investigation therefore became a puzzle composed largely of missing pieces. And yet, despite those missing pieces, detectives continued moving closer to the truth. Not because they found Aaron, but because they began finding inconsistencies. The first cracks appeared within the broader timeline. Statements were examined. Activities were reviewed. Movements were compared. Investigators started identifying areas where explanations failed to align neatly with known facts. This process is rarely dramatic. Television often portrays investigations as sudden breakthroughs and shocking revelations. Reality is slower, more methodical. Detectives spend countless hours reviewing information that appears insignificant. Most leads lead nowhere. Most theories collapse under scrutiny. Progress occurs one detail at a time. That was precisely how the Roygard investigation evolved. While search teams looked for physical evidence, investigators focused on behavior. Behavior before the disappearance. Behavior during the disappearance. Behavior afterward. People often reveal themselves through actions rather than words. Especially during periods of stress. Especially when confronted by scrutiny. As detectives gathered information, they began noticing details that demanded further examination. Questions emerged regarding financial matters. Questions emerged regarding relationships. Questions emerged regarding motives. At this stage, those questions remained only questions. But they pointed investigators in a particular direction. A direction that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, the public perception of the case was also changing. What had initially appeared to be a missing person investigation was slowly acquiring the characteristics of something darker. Communities pay attention when someone vanishes without explanation. Speculation inevitably follows. Rumors emerge. Theories spread. Yet beneath all of that discussion stood a painful reality. A family still lacked answers. A young man remained missing. And every unsuccessful search increased the likelihood that the outcome would be tragic. One of the most haunting aspects of no-body homicide investigations is the uncertainty surrounding the victim's final resting place. Families are denied a fundamental part of grieving. There is no funeral built around certainty. No place to visit. No opportunity to say goodbye in a traditional sense. The disappearance itself becomes an ongoing wound. That wound deepened with every passing week in Aaron's case. The landscape had seemingly swallowed him. Fields revealed nothing. Roads revealed nothing. The coastline revealed nothing. The ocean revealed nothing. Investigators searched and searched, yet the mystery remained intact. At some point during many investigations, detectives begin asking a difficult question. Not where is the victim, but who benefits from the victim's disappearance? That question often leads directly toward motive. And motive frequently reveals suspects. As officers examined Aaron's circumstances more closely, financial issues emerged as a particularly important area of interest. Money leaves records. Records leave trails. Trails lead to answers. What detectives discovered would eventually become central to the prosecution's case. But during the search phase, those discoveries were still developing. The focus remained divided between locating Aaron and understanding the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Every new piece of information was evaluated. Every lead was pursued. Every possibility was considered. The absence of a body forced investigators to become exceptionally thorough. They could not rely upon traditional forensic conclusions. Instead, they needed a complete picture. A picture capable of convincing not only themselves but eventually a jury. Because proving murder without a body requires extraordinary effort. The evidence must speak collectively. Each individual piece may appear small. Together, they form a narrative. That narrative was slowly emerging. And it was becoming increasingly disturbing. As detectives examined the growing body of information, they found themselves returning repeatedly to the same uncomfortable possibility. Aaron's disappearance did not appear random. It appeared connected to someone who knew him. Someone close. Someone with access. Someone capable of exploiting trust. The realization transformed the investigation. Now the search for Aaron was becoming a search for a killer. Yet the killer, if one existed, had one enormous advantage. The most important piece of evidence remained missing. Aaron himself. That absence continued frustrating investigators at every stage. Search teams returned to locations. Officers reviewed possibilities. Experts considered disposal scenarios. Still nothing. The mystery held. And because the mystery held, the psychological pressure on investigators intensified. Cases involving missing victims often create a unique determination among detectives. The victim cannot advocate for themselves. The victim cannot tell their story. The responsibility falls entirely upon the investigation. In Aaron's case, that responsibility became especially significant. Every unanswered question increased the need for answers elsewhere. If the body could not be found, then the truth would have to be uncovered through other means. Piece by piece. Fact by fact. Lie by lie. The search phase of the investigation ultimately revealed something unexpected. Not Aaron's location. Not his remains. Not a hidden crime scene. Instead, it revealed the scale of the challenge ahead. Someone had either disappeared extraordinarily well or had been deliberately hidden extraordinarily well. Investigators increasingly believed the second explanation. And if that belief was correct, then they were confronting a person who had worked very hard to erase evidence. The discovery phase therefore became defined by paradox. The more detectives searched, the more they understood how little physical evidence remained. Yet at the same time, their confidence that a crime had occurred continued growing. The absence itself became evidence. The silence became evidence. The missing traces became evidence. By the end of this stage, one conclusion was beginning to solidify. Aaron Roigard was almost certainly not coming home. The investigation was no longer centered on finding a missing man alive. It was becoming a homicide inquiry. A homicide inquiry unlike most others. Because the victim remained hidden somewhere beyond reach. And the person responsible, if investigators were right, was still walking free. The searches had failed to reveal a body. But they had revealed something else. A mystery far deeper than anyone initially imagined. A mystery rooted not in strangers or random violence, but in relationships, trust, and secrets buried beneath years of ordinary life. The fields of Taranaki remained silent. The coastline remained silent. The winter winds carried no answers. Yet somewhere within that silence, detectives had begun following a trail that would eventually lead them toward a suspect almost nobody wanted to believe was capable of murder. By the time investigators fully accepted that Aaron Roigard was unlikely to be found alive, the case had entered a new and far more difficult phase. The search for a missing man was becoming the hunt for a murderer. And unlike many homicide investigations, detectives were forced to move forward without the piece of evidence most people associate with murder cases. There was still no body. No confirmed crime scene. No forensic reconstruction of a final struggle. Only a growing collection of questions that refused to go away. The challenge facing investigators was enormous. In a traditional homicide investigation, detectives often begin with the victim and work outward. The body reveals injuries. The location reveals context. Forensic evidence provides direction. In Aaron's case, detectives had to build their understanding almost entirely from what remained behind. Records. Statements. Timelines. Financial documents. Behavior. thousands of individual details that seemed disconnected until they were viewed together. The process was painstaking. Every hour of Aaron's known movements had to be reconstructed. Every interaction had to be reviewed. Every explanation had to be tested. Detectives understood that if this case ever reached a courtroom, they would need far more than suspicion. They would need a narrative supported by evidence. A narrative strong enough to explain not only that Aaron was dead, but who was responsible and why. The first task involved eliminating alternative possibilities. Could Aaron have disappeared voluntarily? Investigators explored the theory extensively. At first glance, voluntary disappearances can sometimes resemble criminal acts. Adults have the legal right to leave. People occasionally walk away from jobs, relationships, or communities. Some seek a fresh start elsewhere. Others simply vanish. But voluntary disappearances usually leave traces. A ticket purchased. A bank withdrawal. A phone call. A sighting. A digital footprint. Something. Aaron's case remained stubbornly different. The deeper investigators looked, the less evidence they found suggesting a self-imposed disappearance. His financial activity ceased. His communication ceased. His presence ceased. The silence was complete. That silence became one of the strongest arguments against the theory that he had simply chosen to leave. Once detectives became confident that voluntary disappearance was unlikely, attention naturally shifted toward the people closest to him. The victim's final known contacts. Family members. Associates. Anyone with access to his daily life. Anyone with potential motives. Anyone who could help explain what happened. This stage of an investigation is often uncomfortable. Detectives are forced to examine relationships that others assume are trustworthy. Family members are interviewed. Statements are compared. Contradictions are identified. The goal is not accusation. The goal is understanding. Yet understanding frequently leads toward uncomfortable truths. As investigators examined Aaron's circumstances, they began uncovering details that altered the direction of the case. Money. Again and again, the investigation returned to money. Financial disputes have appeared in countless criminal cases throughout history. Greed is not always dramatic. It rarely announces itself openly. Instead, it grows gradually. Small compromises become larger ones. Minor deceptions become major frauds. A person convinces themselves that one dishonest act is justified. Then another. Then another. Over time, lies become habits. And habits become traps. Detectives began analyzing financial records connected to Aaron. What they discovered raised serious concerns. Evidence emerged suggesting that substantial sums of money connected to Aaron had been misappropriated. The figures were not insignificant. They represented tens of thousands of dollars. For investigators, this discovery was important for two reasons. First, it suggested a potential motive. Second, it suggested a hidden conflict that may have existed before the disappearance. Motive alone does not prove murder. Many people have motives. Far fewer commit homicide. Nevertheless, motive provides direction. It answers a crucial question. Why would someone want the victim gone? As detectives continued their examination, they found themselves increasingly focused on one individual. David Noel Roygard. Aaron's father. The possibility was disturbing. Even for experienced investigators. Cases involving violence within families often carry a different emotional weight. The betrayal feels deeper. The violation of trust feels more profound. Society expects parents to protect children. When evidence points in the opposite direction, the conclusions become difficult to accept. Yet investigators are not allowed the luxury of disbelief. They follow evidence wherever it leads. Even when the destination is uncomfortable. Especially when the destination is uncomfortable. David became a central focus not because of a single dramatic revelation, but because multiple pieces of information gradually converged around him. Financial concerns. Access. Opportunity. Knowledge of Aaron's routines. Knowledge of the local environment. The more detectives examined the circumstances, the more frequently his name appeared within their analysis. Still, suspicion alone was insufficient. Investigators needed evidence. Real evidence. The kind capable of surviving intense scrutiny in court. And obtaining that evidence proved extraordinarily difficult. Nobody homicide cases require patience. Every fact must be tested repeatedly. Defense attorneys will challenge every assumption, every gap, every inference, every conclusion. Detectives knew that one mistake could undermine years of work. The investigation therefore proceeded carefully, methodically, interview after interview, document after document, timeline after timeline. Meanwhile, another challenge emerged. The absence of direct evidence created opportunities for doubt. Without a body, alternative explanations remained theoretically possible. Perhaps Aaron was alive somewhere. Perhaps investigators had overlooked something. Perhaps another unknown individual was responsible. These possibilities had to be addressed. Every theory required examination. Every lead required pursuit. Many led nowhere. That is the reality of major investigations. Progress often comes through elimination rather than discovery. One possibility after another is ruled out until only the most probable explanation remains. As months passed, detectives continued assembling the puzzle. What they found painted an increasingly troubling picture. The alleged financial misconduct became more significant. The timeline became more suspicious. The explanations surrounding Aaron's disappearance became increasingly difficult to reconcile with the available evidence. And still, Aaron remained missing. For investigators, that fact never disappeared into the background. Every meeting, every report, every strategic decision returned to the same objective. Find the truth. Find justice. Find answers. Somewhere beyond the paperwork and evidence charts was a human being who had vanished. That reality gave urgency to the investigation. Yet the closer detectives moved toward their emerging theory, the more complex the case became. Because proving murder without a body requires something powerful. A narrative supported by numerous independent facts. No single piece of evidence would carry the case. Instead, prosecutors would eventually rely on accumulation. Each fact strengthening the next. Each contradiction supporting another conclusion. Like strands woven together into a rope. Individually fragile. Collectively strong. Investigators spent countless hours constructing that rope. Examining financial records. Reviewing statements. Analyzing behavior. Comparing timelines. Looking for inconsistencies. Looking for patterns. Looking for truth. The deeper they looked, the harder it became to dismiss the possibility that Aaron's disappearance was linked directly to hidden financial wrongdoing. According to the theory gradually taking shape, Aaron's continued existence represented a threat. A threat not because of violence. Not because of revenge. But because he might eventually discover the truth. And if that theory was correct, then the motive behind the crime was both chilling and tragically simple. Protection of self-interest. Protection of secrets. Protection of money. History contains countless examples of people committing extraordinary acts to conceal ordinary crimes. Fraud becomes theft. Theft becomes deception. Deception becomes violence. The progression is rarely planned from the beginning. Instead, individuals become trapped by their own decisions. Each lie requires another lie. Each crime requires another crime. Until eventually the consequences become catastrophic. Investigators increasingly believed something similar had occurred here. Yet belief was not enough. Evidence remained essential. Detectives therefore continued building their case piece by piece. The investigation stretched onward. Months became more than a year. The case grew increasingly complex. Public attention intensified. Questions multiplied. And throughout it all, One haunting fact remained unchanged. No one had found Aaron. His absence continued dominating every discussion, every theory, every strategic decision. Without him, there would be no answers. Without answers, there could be no justice. The pressure on investigators was immense. No-body cases are often viewed as some of the most difficult prosecutions in criminal law. The standard of proof remains the same. The burden remains the same. The expectations remain the same. A jury must still be convinced beyond reasonable doubt. Detectives understood exactly what that meant. The evidence needed to be overwhelming. Not emotionally, logically, factually, systematically, and slowly, painstakingly, they were getting there. The emerging picture was no longer one of random disappearance. It was becoming a story of concealed financial misconduct, broken trust, escalating risk, and a victim who may have paid the ultimate price for knowing too much. Still, the investigation had not yet reached its most important moment. The breakthrough was coming. A moment when scattered facts would finally connect. A moment when prosecutors would believe they had enough to move forward. A moment when suspicion would transform into formal accusation. But before that happened, detectives spent months navigating dead ends, false possibilities, and unanswered questions. Every investigation has those moments. Periods when progress feels painfully slow. Periods when certainty remains just out of reach. The Roygard case was no exception. Yet beneath the frustration, beneath the uncertainty, investigators continued moving forward. Following records. Following evidence. Following motive. And unknowingly drawing closer to a conclusion that would shock the nation. Because the person they increasingly believed responsible was not a stranger hidden in the shadows. He was standing at the very center of Aaron's life from the beginning. A father. A trusted figure. A man who should have been searching for answers alongside everyone else. Instead, investigators were beginning to suspect he already knew exactly what had happened. For more than a year, the investigation into Aaron Roygard's disappearance had moved through uncertainty. Detectives had searched vast areas of countryside. They had examined countless records. They had interviewed witnesses. They had reconstructed timelines. Yet one problem remained constant. They still did not possess the kind of evidence that usually defines a murder case. There was no body. No confirmed murder scene. No eyewitness account describing a killing. To many people outside law enforcement, such obstacles might have appeared insurmountable. But experienced investigators understand something important. Criminal cases are rarely solved by one dramatic piece of evidence. They are solved when dozens of smaller pieces finally connect. A timeline aligns. A motive becomes clear. A contradiction exposes a lie. A pattern emerges. And suddenly a story that once appeared fragmented begins to make sense. That moment was approaching in the Roygard investigation. Not through luck. Not through a surprise confession. But through persistence. The kind of persistence that forces detectives to keep revisiting evidence long after others might have given up. As investigators continued reviewing financial records associated with Aaron and his father, the significance of what they had uncovered became increasingly difficult to ignore. The money trail was no longer a side issue. It was becoming the center of the case. According to evidence later presented by prosecutors, more than 66,000 New Zealand dollars connected to Aaron had been misappropriated. The amount was substantial. More importantly, it represented more than lost money. It represented motive. And motive was exactly what investigators needed. Financial crimes often leave fingerprints that physical evidence does not. A person can hide a body. A person can destroy clothing. A person can erase traces from a crime scene. But financial transactions create records. Records persist. Records tell stories. The deeper detectives examined those records, the clearer the story became. The prosecution would later argue that Aaron's continued existence posed a growing threat. If he discovered what had happened to his money, serious consequences could follow. Questions would be asked. Explanations would be demanded. The alleged deception could unravel. For investigators, this possibility changed everything. The disappearance no longer looked random. It looked purposeful. A potential solution to a problem. A brutal solution. But a solution nonetheless. That realization marked one of the most important turning points in the case. The focus shifted from asking whether Aaron had been murdered to understanding why. And once detectives began examining motive through that lens, other pieces of evidence started fitting together more naturally. Behavior became significant. Statements became significant. Timing became significant. The investigation entered a phase where every detail was measured against the emerging theory. Did the evidence support it? Did the evidence contradict it? Again and again, investigators found support. Not through one overwhelming revelation. Through accumulation. The strongest criminal cases often resemble mosaics. Each individual tile appears ordinary. Only when viewed together does the full image emerge. That was happening here. Months of work were beginning to reveal a coherent picture. A picture that centered increasingly on David Roigard. As detectives moved closer to that conclusion, they also confronted the challenge of proving something that had never been physically observed. Aaron's death. Legally and practically, this was critical. A jury would eventually need to accept not only that Aaron was dead but that his death resulted from deliberate human action. Without remains, that argument required exceptional preparation. Investigators therefore approached the issue methodically. They examined every indication of life after Aaron's disappearance. There were virtually none. No meaningful contact. No financial activity. No credible sightings that could withstand scrutiny. The silence stretched across months. Then across years. At some point, silence itself became evidence. People do not simply abandon every aspect of their existence indefinitely. Not without leaving traces. Not without contacting someone. Not without interacting with the world. Aaron's complete disappearance became increasingly incompatible with voluntary explanations. That realization strengthened the homicide theory considerably. Yet detectives still needed more. They needed to understand not only what happened but how the suspected offender behaved afterward. Criminal investigations often reveal a surprising truth. The cover-up can be more revealing than the crime itself. A person attempting to conceal wrongdoing must continue making decisions. Each decision creates opportunities for mistakes. Each lie creates opportunities for contradiction. Each explanation creates opportunities for scrutiny. Investigators paid close attention to these patterns. And as they did, they began noticing something important. Certain actions appeared less consistent with concern for a missing loved one and more consistent with someone attempting to manage a dangerous situation. Those observations added weight to the existing evidence. Again, no single fact proved murder. The strength of the case lay in the combination. Motive. Opportunity. Financial misconduct. Behavior. Disappearance. Silence. Together they formed a narrative that detectives increasingly believed reflected the truth. The breakthrough, therefore, was not one moment. It was a transformation. A gradual shift from uncertainty to confidence. The investigation had finally reached a point where authorities believed they could explain what happened. Not every detail. Not the precise method. Not the location of Aaron's remains. But the broader truth. And that truth was devastating. Investigators concluded that Aaron had not disappeared voluntarily. He had been killed. The conclusion carried enormous consequences. Once detectives reached that determination, the next step became unavoidable. Formal charges. The decision to charge someone with murder is among the most serious actions any justice system can take. Prosecutors do not make such decisions lightly. Particularly in nobody cases. The evidence must be reviewed repeatedly. Weaknesses must be identified. Alternative explanations must be considered. Every aspect of the case must survive intense scrutiny. The Roygard investigation underwent exactly that process. By this stage, authorities believed they possessed sufficient evidence to proceed. The focus turned toward accountability, toward transforming years of investigative work into a courtroom case. For Aaron's loved ones, this development likely brought conflicting emotions. Relief that progress was finally occurring. Pain that the investigation had reached such a grim conclusion. Hope that answers might emerge. Fear that some answers would never come. Murder investigations often create this contradiction. Justice can provide clarity, but it cannot reverse loss. The person at the center of the case remains gone. That reality never changes. As preparations for prosecution moved forward, another question lingered over the entire investigation. Where was Aaron? Even after detectives developed their theory, even after they identified their suspect, the mystery of the missing body remained unresolved. Search efforts had failed. The landscape had surrendered no answers. The ocean had surrendered no answers. The countryside remained silent. This unresolved element gave the case an almost haunting quality. Investigators could explain motive. They could explain opportunity. They could explain why Aaron likely died. But they could not explain where he rested. The secret remained hidden. Known only to the killer. Perhaps not even fully known anymore. Years of time have a way of burying truths beneath memory. Nevertheless, the inability to recover Aaron's remains did not stop the investigation. Nor did it stop prosecutors. The evidence they had assembled was substantial. Enough to move forward. Enough to place the case before a jury. Enough to ask 12 ordinary citizens to examine the facts and determine whether the prosecution's theory reflected reality. The breakthrough had accomplished its purpose. The investigation was no longer searching blindly. The direction was clear. The suspect was identified. The motive was established. The prosecution was prepared. Now the battle would move into a different arena. The courtroom. There, every assumption would be challenged. Every witness would be questioned. Every piece of evidence would be examined. Defense lawyers would attack weaknesses. Prosecutors would present their narrative. Jurors would carry the burden of judgment. And hovering over every moment of the proceedings would be the same question that had haunted the case from the beginning. What happened to Aaron Roygard? The prosecution believed they knew the answer. The defense would argue otherwise. The outcome would determine whether years of investigative work had succeeded. Whether justice could be achieved despite the absence of a body. Whether a murder could be proven when the victim himself remained missing. For detectives, the breakthrough represented the culmination of relentless effort. For prosecutors, it represented the beginning of a new challenge. And for the man now accused of murder, it marked the moment when suspicion transformed into something far more dangerous. A formal allegation. A public accusation. A case that would soon place him at the center of one of New Zealand's most remarkable nobody murder trials. The mystery had not been solved completely, but it had advanced far enough to force a confrontation with the truth. And that confrontation was about to unfold before an entire nation. When the case finally entered the courtroom, it carried with it one of the greatest challenges any prosecutor can face. How do you prove a murder when there is no body? For generations, criminal investigators around the world have relied upon physical evidence recovered from victims. A body can reveal injuries, timelines, causes of death, and countless forensic clues. It often becomes the silent witness at the center of a homicide trial. Aaron Roygard could not provide that testimony. His body had never been found. The fields of Taranaki had surrendered no remains. The coastline had surrendered no remains. The sea had surrendered no remains. Years after his disappearance, investigators still did not know where he was. Yet despite that absence, prosecutors believed they had assembled a case strong enough to establish the truth. The trial that followed would become one of the most closely watched no-body murder prosecutions in New Zealand. The courtroom itself was far removed from the isolated farmland where the story had begun. Gone were the muddy paddocks, the coastal winds, and the lonely roads stretching across the countryside. In their place stood polished wood, legal arguments, witness testimony, and the structured rituals of justice. But although the setting had changed, the central question remained exactly the same. What happened to Aaron Roigard? Every witness who entered the courtroom was, in one way or another, helping answer that question. Every document presented to the jury was part of the answer. Every financial record. Every timeline. Every contradiction. Every piece of evidence formed part of a narrative prosecutors had spent years constructing. The trial lasted approximately 5 weeks. 5 weeks during which jurors were asked to examine not a single dramatic piece of evidence, but an entire collection of circumstances. This distinction was important. The prosecution's case depended heavily on circumstantial evidence. Popular culture often misunderstands the term. Many people hear circumstantial evidence and assume it means weak evidence. In reality, some of the strongest criminal cases in history have relied upon circumstances. Human behavior creates patterns. Actions create consequences. When enough circumstances point toward the same conclusion, they can become extraordinarily powerful. That was the strategy facing the jury. Rather than presenting a recovered body, prosecutors presented a story supported by facts. Aaron had disappeared completely. His communications had ceased. His financial activity had ceased. No credible evidence suggested he was alive. At the same time, investigators had uncovered evidence relating to substantial financial misconduct involving money connected to Aaron. According to the prosecution, these facts were not isolated. They were connected. The alleged theft created motive. The motive explained the disappearance. The disappearance explained the silence. The silence pointed toward murder. The argument was methodical. Piece by piece. Step by step. Jurors were asked to examine the evidence not as individual fragments but as part of a larger picture. Meanwhile, the defense faced a different challenge. No-body cases inherently contain uncertainty. Without remains, questions remain unanswered. Without forensic confirmation, alternative possibilities can be proposed. The defense's role was not necessarily to prove what happened. Their role was to create reasonable doubt, to challenge assumptions, to question conclusions, to force prosecutors to meet the highest legal standard. That standard never changes. Regardless of public opinion, regardless of emotional reactions, regardless of suspicion. A criminal conviction requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. The burden rests entirely with the prosecution. Throughout the trial, jurors listened as lawyers presented competing interpretations of the evidence. One side argued that Aaron had been murdered. The other challenged whether that conclusion had truly been proven. For the family and loved ones connected to the case, the proceedings must have been emotionally exhausting. Every day brought renewed attention to the disappearance. Every witness revisited painful events. Every argument reopened old wounds. Courtrooms often present crime in a structured and orderly manner. But behind every exhibit and legal submission stands human suffering. A missing son. A shattered family. Years of uncertainty. Years without answers. Years without a grave. Those realities cannot be separated from the legal process. They remain present even when unspoken. As the trial continued, prosecutors focused heavily on motive. Again and again, the issue of money emerged. The alleged misappropriation of more than $66,000 was not presented merely as financial wrongdoing. It was presented as the key to understanding everything else. According to the prosecution's theory, Aaron represented a threat. Not because he was violent. Not because he sought revenge. But because he could expose the truth. The alleged theft could not remain hidden forever. Eventually questions would arise. Eventually explanations would be demanded. Eventually consequences could follow. The prosecution argued that murder became the solution chosen to prevent those consequences. It was a chilling theory. Not a crime of sudden rage. Not a spontaneous act. But a calculated decision motivated by self-preservation. The image painted by prosecutors was deeply unsettling. A father willing to sacrifice his own son to protect himself. The emotional weight of that allegation hung over every stage of the proceedings. Family relationships carry enormous significance in the human mind. People expect parents to protect children. The accusation at the heart of this trial inverted that expectation completely. As testimony continued, jurors were tasked with evaluating not only evidence but human behavior. What made sense? What did not? Which explanation best fit the known facts? This process is often less dramatic than people imagine. Jurors spend hours reviewing details, examining records, listening carefully, comparing timelines, looking for consistency, looking for truth. The work is deliberate. The responsibility immense. Because ultimately they are deciding another person's future. In this case, they were also deciding whether Aaron's disappearance would legally be recognized for what prosecutors believed it was: a murder. As the trial approached its conclusion, years of investigation had been condensed into a single question before the jury. Had the prosecution proven its case? The answer would determine everything. After approximately 5 weeks of proceedings, the moment finally arrived. The jury retired to deliberate. 4 investigators, prosecutors, family members, and observers, those hours carried enormous tension. Months of investigation. Years of uncertainty. Countless hours of preparation. Everything now rested in the hands of 12 jurors. Deliberations are among the most private parts of any criminal trial. The discussions occur behind closed doors. The reasoning remains largely hidden. Only the final decision becomes public. Eventually, the jury returned. And with that return came the conclusion investigators had spent years pursuing. David Noel Roigard was found guilty of murdering his son, Aaron Roigard. The verdict represented a landmark moment in the case. Not because every question had been answered. Many had not. The location of Aaron's body remained unknown. The precise details of his final moments remained unknown. The exact method used remained uncertain. Yet despite those unanswered questions, the jury concluded that the evidence established guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The conviction demonstrated something important about modern criminal investigations. A body is powerful evidence. But it is not the only path to justice. Human behavior leaves traces. Financial records leave traces. Deception leaves traces. When enough traces point toward the same conclusion, they can speak louder than physical remains. For prosecutors, the verdict validated years of work. For investigators, it represented the culmination of relentless effort. For Aaron's loved ones, the emotions were undoubtedly more complicated. Relief and grief often coexist after criminal convictions. The verdict provides accountability. But accountability does not restore what was lost. Aaron was still gone. The absence remained. The empty place at family gatherings remained. The unanswered questions remained. Justice can punish wrongdoing. It cannot reverse tragedy. Several weeks later, attention shifted from guilt to punishment. Sentencing is where courts formally express society's judgment regarding the seriousness of a crime. On February 15, 2016, David Roigard appeared before the court for sentencing. The outcome reflected the gravity of the offense. He received a sentence of life imprisonment. The court further ordered that he serve a minimum period of 19 years before becoming eligible for parole consideration. The sentencing judge delivered a harsh assessment. The language reflected the court's view of the crime and the conduct surrounding it. The message was unmistakable. The justice system regarded the offense as one of exceptional seriousness. For many observers, the sentence represented the final legal chapter of the case. The investigation had succeeded. The prosecution had succeeded. A conviction had been secured. Yet even as the courtroom process concluded, an uncomfortable reality remained. One mystery had survived everything. It survived the investigation. It survived the trial. It survived the verdict. It survived the sentence. Where was Aaron? No witness could answer. No evidence could answer. No search operation could answer. The person most likely to know the truth had never revealed it. And so the legal process ended with both resolution and uncertainty existing side by side. A killer had been convicted. A motive had been established. Justice had been delivered. But the final chapter of Aaron Roigard's story remained unwritten. His body had never been recovered. His resting place remained unknown. And long after the courtroom emptied and the sentence was imposed, that lingering mystery continued casting a shadow over one of New Zealand's most remarkable murder cases. The law had reached its conclusion. The search for answers had not. After the courtroom doors closed and the legal system completed its work, what remained of the Roigard case was something far more difficult to resolve. Not a trial. Not a verdict. But absence. Aaron Roigard was still missing. And in many ways, that fact continued to define everything about the case more than any legal outcome ever could. Justice systems are designed to answer specific questions. Was a crime committed? Who was responsible? What punishment is appropriate? In that sense, the conviction of David Noel Roigard answered the central legal question. But the human questions remained open. Where did Aaron spend his final moments? Where was he taken? Where was he left? Why has he never been found? Those questions do not disappear with a verdict. They linger. They grow heavier with time. For Aaron's family and those who cared about him, the aftermath of the case was not defined by closure in the traditional sense. Closure implies an ending, an understanding, a sense of completion. But cases involving missing victims rarely provide that experience. Instead, they leave behind a different kind of reality. One where certainty and uncertainty coexist. A conviction confirms responsibility, but it does not restore what was taken. It does not bring back a voice. It does not return a presence. It does not fill the empty space left behind. In the years following the trial, the central mystery of the case remained unchanged. Despite extensive searches during the investigation, Aaron's body was never located. No grave has ever been confirmed. No remains have been publicly identified. No definitive site has ever been revealed. That absence has become one of the most haunting aspects of the entire story. It is a silence that continues long after the legal system has finished speaking. For investigators, cases like this never fully end. They close operationally, but questions remain in the background. Occasionally, new information is considered. Occasionally, theories are revisited. Occasionally, hope emerges that the missing piece might still be found. But in many long-term missing victim cases, time works against resolution. Landscapes change. Erosion reshapes terrain. Agricultural activity alters ground conditions. Memory fades. Witnesses move on. Evidence becomes harder to recover with each passing year. The Taranaki region itself continues its own natural rhythm. Farmers work the land. Rain cycles through seasons. Coastal winds reshape the shoreline. Life continues in the same fields where the investigation once unfolded. But beneath that continuity lies a question that has never been answered. Somewhere in that landscape, Aaron Roigard's remains are believed to rest. Yet no one has ever been able to bring him home. That unresolved reality gives the case a particular emotional weight. For many people, justice is associated with resolution. A conviction feels like the final chapter. But for families of missing murder victims, the story does not end there. The absence becomes part of daily life. A permanent reminder that something essential is still missing. Even with a conviction secured, there is no place to visit. No memorial grounded in certainty. No physical location that confirms finality. Only uncertainty remains. And uncertainty has a way of persisting long after legal systems have moved on. The Roygard case also stands as a reminder of the limits of evidence. Modern investigations are powerful. They can reconstruct events with remarkable precision. They can build cases from financial records, digital activity, witness testimony, and behavioral analysis. But they cannot always recover what has been deliberately concealed. Especially when time has passed. Especially when those responsible do not reveal the truth. In this case, investigators believe they established what happened to Aaron. A jury accepted that conclusion. A conviction followed. But one critical element was never recovered. The physical truth of where he lies. That missing piece continues to define the case as much as any verdict ever could. For those studying true crime, the Roygard case sits within a category that is both rare and significant. A no-body murder conviction. These cases are legally possible but exceptionally demanding. They require a convergence of evidence strong enough to replace what is normally considered essential. They rely on patterns rather than direct observation. On consistency rather than physical proof. On logic rather than visibility. When successful, they demonstrate that justice can still be achieved even when the most obvious evidence is absent. But they also highlight something more unsettling. That some truths remain partially hidden even after conviction. Aaron Roygard's story is one of those cases. A young man whose life ended under circumstances that were never fully exposed to the world. A disappearance that became a murder trial. A murder trial that became a conviction. And a conviction that still did not answer every question. The emotional impact of that reality continues to ripple outward. For families, there is no final scene where everything becomes clear. There is only continuation. Grief continues. Questions continue. The search for understanding continues. In many ways, the absence becomes its own kind of presence. Always there. Never resolved. The finality that courts provide is legal, not emotional. And the difference between those two forms of closure is profound. Years after the verdict, the core mystery remains intact. Not in the courtroom, but in the land where the story began. The fields of Taranaki continue to stretch beneath changing skies. Mount Taranaki still stands over the region like a silent witness. The coastline still meets the sea with relentless force. And somewhere within that landscape, the final resting place of Aaron Roygard has never been revealed. That fact ensures the case remains more than history. It remains an open wound in memory. A reminder that even when justice is achieved, it does not always bring completeness. Because justice can determine responsibility. But it cannot always recover what was lost. And in the case of Aaron Roygard, what was lost is still somewhere beyond reach. Not in the courtroom. Not in the verdict. But in the silence that followed. A silence that began in 2014. And has never truly ended. When the legal system finished its work in the Roygard case, the world outside the courtroom quickly moved on in the way it always does after a major trial. Headlines fade. Public attention shifts. New cases emerge. New stories replace old ones. But for those directly connected to Aaron Roygard, nothing moved on in the same way. Time passed, yes. Seasons changed across the Taranaki countryside. Rain returned, then sun, then winter again. The land continued its slow, steady rhythm, indifferent to human loss. But absence does not follow the same rhythm as the world around it. It remains fixed in place. Unchanged. Unresolved. Aaron Roygard's disappearance was no longer an active investigation in the public sense, but it remained an unresolved truth in the most important sense. A young man had vanished. A conviction had been secured. A life had ended. And yet the most fundamental question of all still had no answer. Where was he? That question lingered beyond legal boundaries. It followed the case long after sentencing. It outlived headlines and court records. Because no matter how strong the evidence presented in court may be, it cannot replace the physical reality of a missing person. For families of victims in no-body murder cases, there is a specific kind of grief that never fully resolves. It is not only grief for loss. It is grief for uncertainty. There is no grave to visit. No place of closure. No final moment of certainty to anchor memory. Instead, there is only imagination trying to fill gaps that will never be confirmed. What happened in those final moments? Where he might be. Whether he suffered. Whether he knew